Hey everybody, it's Trail over at GOHUNT. We're in a brand new year, 2023, in January, and that means it's application season. And right out the gate, one of the first states every spring that has their application out is Wyoming. So the application deadline for Wyoming Elk is approaching. It's going to be January 31st at midnight. You've got up until the end of the month to make sure that you get your application in for elk in Wyoming. I would highly recommend applying in Wyoming. In my opinion, Wyoming is a must-apply state for elk. And because of that, I wanted to take a few minutes and kind of run you through some of the most commonly asked questions about Wyoming and specifically Wyoming elk. Okay, your application for elk in Wyoming has to be done online. That system is completely online at this point. You have to get an account set up and it's pretty easy to apply, but like I said, you do have to apply online. One of the most commonly asked questions is, do you have to buy a hunting license to apply in Wyoming? And it's one of the states that you do not. But there is one little caveat, and that's the fact that you have to front the cost of the license that you apply for. So if you apply for elk, you've got to plan on fronting the entire cost of that license, and it can be kind of expensive. They're going to hold on to that money through the draw, and then once the draw is completed, if you're unsuccessful, they're actually going to refund you the cost of that license. So the cost of the licenses are going to be $707 for non-residents if you apply in the regular draw, and it's going to be $1,283 if you apply in the special draw. And I'm going to get into the differences between those two draws, but like I said, you do have to front that either on a debit card or a credit card, and they are going to keep that money until they complete the draw, after which they will refund you back to that card if you were unsuccessful. One thing to be aware of in Wyoming is that you cannot return a license if you draw it. So if you're successful in the draw, you plan on keeping that permit and going hunting. There's no ability to return that for a refund or to even transfer that permit to another person, in your household. So you definitely want to be aware of that. If you plan on applying in Wyoming, there is no returning that permit. That permit is yours and you are going hunting if you draw it. Another one of the most commonly asked questions is about Wyoming's draw system. And I kind of noted on a little bit earlier about the difference between the regular and the special draw. So Wyoming has two different draw pools, if you will, for non-residents. They call it the regular draw and the special draw. Those draws are essentially the same. The permit's the same should you draw it. The only difference is the cost to go into those draws. So like I said, it's going to be $707 for a non-resident to go into the regular draw versus $1,283 to go into the special draw. And you'll need to decide when you apply which draw you would like to apply for. The difference in those two draws is that you could potentially get better odds if you go into the special draw, and that is based on the fact that fewer people are typically willing to pay a higher price for that permit. So the price of that permit actually decreases slightly, in some cases, the number of people that apply. That's not always the case. That's why it's really imperative that you look at the draw odds, especially for some of the highly sought after permits in the state of Wyoming. Those permits are so highly coveted that the number of people willing to pay that higher price is essentially the same. So the odds may not work out. And actually, in some cases, it may actually have better odds if you apply in the regular draw. But that's why it's really imperative that you look at draw odds. You should definitely look at the application strategy article for Wyoming in your insider account and become familiar with the hunts that you want to apply for to determine whether it's actually beneficial to go into the special draw and pay that higher price. All right, when I talk about the regular and the special pool of permits for non-residents, it's actually kind of imperative that I go back and talk about the percentage splits for non-residents. So Wyoming is going to allocate 84% of their permits to residents and 16% of their permits to non-residents. That's from the very tip-top view of looking at their draw system. Beyond that, they're actually going to allocate 60% of their non-resident permits in the regular draw and 40% of the permits through the special draw. So there are a few more permits in the regular draw than the special draw. And then within each one of those pools, both the regular and special non-resident, they're going to break that down even further, and they're actually going to allocate 75% of the permits to the applicants with the most preference points and 25% in a random draw. So typically, if there are enough permits for any hunt that you apply for, there is a random chance to draw. We often get questions about preference points and how that system works in Wyoming. So Wyoming is a true preference point state, meaning the applicants with the most points that apply for any given hunt are going to be guaranteed those permits. When you talk about the random side of that 25% of those permits in the non-resident draw, those are not point specific, and every applicant that applies is actually on the same playing field. So when you're looking at our draw odds within your insider account and you look at those standalone draw odds, if there is a percentage that you might draw all the way down to that 0 point level, that would indicate that there was a random permit available for that hunt. So you want to be aware of that. If that total is 0, as you look across those draw odds, 0 up to whatever points it took to draw, that means that there was no random permits allocated, and essentially if you apply for one of those hunts, you're wasting your chance at the draw. Wyoming only takes into account your first choice before they move to the next applicant. So they're not going to look at all 3 choices before they move on to the next person. So really your first choice is the one that counts the most. They're going to go through every applicant's first choice before they move to any applicant's second or third choice. In Wyoming, if you draw your first choice, they will void your points. You'll lose your points. If you draw your second choice, for example, you can actually retain the points that you had when you applied, and you could actually purchase another point that year. When you're looking at standalone draw odds within your insider account, you can actually hit the drop-down box. You can change your choice from first choice to second choice, and you can actually look at the odds of drawing a hunt as a second choice. So be aware, to draw a hunt as a second or a third choice in Wyoming, essentially it would mean that those permits are left over after every applicant's first choice is considered. So it's not like they're going to consider all of them. Realistically, you're only going to draw your second or third choice if they're leftover permits after everybody's already been considered. Like I said, you only lose your points if you draw your first choice. The only other situation in which your points will be purged or void is if you fail to purchase a point for 2 consecutive years. And that's another thing I would touch on. It's commonly asked, if you apply for a hunt in Wyoming and you're unsuccessful in the draw, are you guaranteed a preference point? That's the case in a lot of states. That is not the case in Wyoming. You still have to go back in and purchase a point during the purchase point only time frame, which is typically July 1st to October 31st. You just simply log on to Wyoming Game and Fish website and you buy your preference point. So be aware of that. You're going to have to buy a preference point even if you are unsuccessful in the draw. Another one of the most commonly asked questions about Wyoming is, can I hunt a designated wilderness area? Wyoming is special in this regard, and you cannot hunt a designated wilderness area as a non-resident without a guide or an outfitter or with a resident of Wyoming to accompany you. So that person would have to accompany you on your hunt. That's a special consideration that you ought to think about because there is a lot of designated wilderness areas in Wyoming. A lot of the best hunts in the state are actually really good permits and they're relatively easy to draw, but that is the case because there is so much wilderness area within those units. And like I said, as a non-resident, you cannot hunt them without a guide or an outfitter or a resident guide to accompany you. We commonly get asked, is there a difference between a designated wilderness area and a wilderness study area? And there is a difference. A wilderness study area is a BLM designation. You can hunt a wilderness study area as a non-resident without a guide. You cannot hunt a designated wilderness area without a guide because, like I said, those are 2 different distinctions. One is a BLM distinction, the other one is a Forest Service distinction. So be aware of that when you plan your application for this fall. Another common question that we get is about our draw odds and how we display those in Wyoming. You'll often see a category in those standalone draw odds between whole points. So, for example, between 3 and 4 points. And that's because in Wyoming, they allow you to apply as a group. And when you apply as a group, what they're going to do is they're going to take the number of preference points and they're going to average those for the group. And the group application is actually going to go into the draw with that exact number out to the 4th decimal point. So there are those instances where a group applies where their point total is going to be between 2 whole points. So that's why you're going to see that in your standalone draw odds. There is no negative to applying as a group in Wyoming because Wyoming will actually over allocate permits to take care of a group. So let me give you an example. If you apply as a group in Wyoming, let's say there's a group of 2, there's only 1 permit left, your application's chosen, they'll actually give both of you a permit they'll over allocate. So there actually is no negative to applying as a group in Wyoming. I actually would encourage you, apply as a group in Wyoming. There's definitely a benefit. If you can find somebody that's got more points than you can piggyback their points, you can apply together as a group, and you can potentially up your point total going into the draw and increase your chances of drawing a permit. A few more commonly asked questions about Wyoming are about the hunt types. So they label their hunts as types. Full-priced hunts are typically type 1, type 2, type 9, type 4, and type 5. So type 1 and type 2 are both rifle permits. The type 2 permit may differ by the season that you can hunt, or it may limit you to a portion of the unit that you can hunt. But those are both rifle permits. Wyoming is actually a pretty cool state in that those hunts, for the most part, type 1, type 2, you can also, if you want to, buy an archery stamp over the counter, which is $72 for a non-resident. And you'll need to check the individual chart for the archery season. We include that within our application strategy for elk to see if that opportunity is open for you. But essentially what that allows you to do is to buy an archery stamp for the permit you drew, either the type 1 or type 2. You hunt during the archery season, and if you failed to fill your permit, you can actually return and hunt that during the rifle season. So that's one of the benefits of Wyoming. It's actually a super cool program, in my opinion. It gives you the opportunity to really scout, hunt with a bow, and then return and hunt with a rifle if you haven't filled your permit. But like I said, you'll want to look at that archery season graph within the application strategy to determine if the hunts that you're applying for are open to that archery season. The other types, type 9 is an archery only hunt, meaning that if you draw a type 9 permit, that is an archery only season, and you're only able to hunt during the archery season dates of that hunt that you drew. So be aware of that. Type 4, type 5, which are also full price licenses, those are cow and calf licenses. Those are allocated through this full price draw. Be aware that if you apply for a type 4, type 5 cow-calf hunt, if you draw that permit, your points will be purged. The other types that I noted are type 6 and type 7. Those are reduced price elk hunts, cow-calf hunts. Those are allocated through an entirely different draw, and when you apply in Wyoming, you'll actually see those indicated. When you apply, it'll say reduced price. That draw is completely separate from this full price draw. There's no point system. It's completely random within that reduced price draw. You can actually apply for both the full price draw and the reduced price draw. And like I said, two different draws, your points will not be touched at all if you apply in that reduced price draw. It's actually a great opportunity to get out and hunt cow and calf. You may plan on drawing a bull tag in the future, so it's a great chance to maybe draw a cow tag in a unit that you're interested in. Go out, hunt it, get used to it, have a good hunt, and then potentially return in the future to hunt a bull tag. So be aware that when you apply, there's two different draws, reduced price, full price, and they do have different draw systems. Last couple questions. We often get asked about the general season. So the general season draw is a draw tag, and there are tags allocated in both the regular and the special draw. Even though it's called general season, it's still a draw for non-residents. A resident can simply buy that permit over the counter and go hunt, but a non-resident must draw that general season tag. It is based on a preference point system, just like the rest of the limited entry hunts. Be aware that typically it's going to take between 4 and 5, maybe 6 points this year, depending on whether you apply in the regular or the special draw. When you draw that general season elk tag, you can hunt any of the 51 general season elk units, and that is for 2023. It looks like for 2024 there is going to be some changes. It looks like they're potentially going to break up the state into 13 general season areas, and you would have to pick. So in my opinion, if you've got the points to draw a general season tag this year, I would highly recommend that you burn those points, go on a general season hunt where you have the opportunity to hunt any or all of the general season units. The last point I would like to make in Wyoming is based on the words point creep. We get this question every year. It said my odds were 100% at any given point level. Why didn't I draw? And that's because of what we call point creep. So essentially what you have is less permits than you have people applying. So there's a high demand. You also have in Wyoming a situation where people are allowed to buy preference points in the preference point only time frame from July to October, and they can bank those points without ever actually applying. So on any given year, these people that have been buying points can jump into the draw system and jump you and take your permit. We also have situations where people have been applying for a long time and they decide, you know what, I'm not going to chase these high quality hunts anymore. I may not catch them. I'm going to burn my points on a lesser hunt. And in that case, it may jump your point total. So it's really important that you look at the detailed draw odds page within your insider account. That's going to show you how many people applied at each point level and where permits were allocated. That's going to help you better judge your chances of drawing a permit in Wyoming. It really helps you evaluate point creep. You can look at 5 years worth of draw trend data to help you make the best choice. If that seems overly complicated, typically what I tell people is look at the hunts available at 1 or 2 points less than you currently have. That will give you a good idea of the hunts that you could potentially draw going into 2023. So those are our most commonly asked questions about Wyoming. There's more draws coming up. The moose, sheep, goat, that deadline is coming up in April. I believe it's April 17th. Those systems are a smidge different. We'll do another one of these where we talk about those species. The application for deer and antelope doesn't come up until the end of May. So we'll do another one of these talking about those species specifically. But this is really what you need to know to apply for elk in Wyoming. Like I said, Wyoming is a phenomenal elk state, in my opinion. It has probably the best quality versus opportunity in the West. And in my opinion, it's a must-apply state. So check those out. Like I said, the best asset to you is going to be your GOHUNT Insider Research account. If you don't have an account, sign up now. It has everything that you need to potentially put a permit in your pocket in Wyoming for elk in 2023.